Let's get started. My name is John DeBenedictis. I'm the Executive Director of the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada, and we are doing another Behind the Bench webinar. And our special guest this time is John O'Sullivan. And John, who I've had a chance to meet him a few times, and I have a copy of his book, Changing the Game. And, you know, this is a topic that is dear to me because I've always believed that things in youth soccer needed to change. And when I read his book, I said, you know, every parent should get his book. So, John, welcome to our webinar, and just give us a bit of background about yourself before we get into the topic.
Yeah, sure. So, like all of you listening, you know, I'm a passionate lover of the game of soccer, for sure. That's what I grew up. I grew up in New York and played lots of sports, but ended up playing soccer at the NCAA Division I level, and then played in the USISL, which is the league. You know, my last year playing was the first year of Major League Soccer, and I was happily retiring at that point and moving on to other things in my life, but that became coaching. And so I went and I coached at the University of Vermont for a couple of years, and then really fell in love with youth coaching and did that in Michigan, and then out here in Oregon where I live now. So I've kind of coached every age from, you know, 4 or 5 year olds with my own kids to I was a head coach of a WPSL team, NCAA soccer, high school soccer, and youth at all ages. My favorite is really sort of, you know, middle school age. So sort of like 11 to 14 years old. I love that age, both boys and girls. Such a great time to influence people, not only, you know, technically and tactically, but as a human being, and such an awkward time in those kids' lives as they're growing and changing. You know, just having an adult mentor outside of their family telling them it's okay, and you know, the world will not end here soon. So yeah, that's it. And you know, you've got a copy there of my first book, Changing the Game. About a year and a half ago, I published a second book called Every Moment Matters, which was basically that book for coaches. So how the world's best coaches inspire their athletes and build great teams. And then yeah, I have a podcast called Way of Champions with my friend Jerry Lynch. And we do a conference and stuff, which we'll talk about together. And up until COVID, I used to fly 150,000 miles speaking all over the world, and now I do it from this little screen in front of me right here. You're still muted.
Yeah, things have changed, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I got to mute because there's some construction going on behind me, which I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Zoom world is a bit different, but you know, the one thing that we've noticed just with our own association is that we've had people join us from India, from you know, Spain, from South Africa, from the Middle East. So you know, that kind of is the cool thing about maybe Zoom and being able to share information. But yeah, we definitely do miss those days where we can get together. And I know that, you know, the big convention that the Americans have there, that's been canceled, and we're hoping it's on this year in Kansas. And I don't know, are you planning to go there?
Yeah. I mean, I've been asked to present. Obviously, I would have been a presenter last year there as well. And I did do presentation in the virtual version that they did, which was great. And I enjoyed it a ton, because I think what they did really well was say, well, let's reimagine it, right? Let's reimagine it. Like, let's not try to recreate what we do in person virtually. Let's take advantage of this, right? So they brought in Jose Mourinho, who of course could never in January fly to the US to give a talk. And they brought in Jesse Marsch, who's now at Leipzig. And yeah, you know, so that was great. Like, I actually really enjoyed it, and listened to you know, a couple of the presentations and things like that. It was nice. And so, you know, hopefully everyone's keeping their fingers crossed that, yeah, we'll be able to get back in person coming up here in 22. But we'll see how it goes. But, you know, I mean, I think everyone's taking advantage of this time to learn. I think right out of the gate in March and April of 2020, everyone poured themselves into this, and then it kind of, everyone got tired of it because you couldn't go use it. Like, how much information can you collect before you need to be able to go out and try it in a practice and see what looks great and what fabulously blows up in your face and seem like a great idea and doesn't. So now that people are coaching more, I think they're finding this nice balance and recognizing that, hey, this is a good way to learn. And I think in person is always the best, but if you can only get 10 people in person, you can get 100 people on a webinar. Like, give me the 100, and we'll influence more people that way.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just get on to your book and your expertise. And I know that with our association, our president, or our late president, Tony Waiters, who I don't know if you knew very, very much, but he went from coaching the national team in '86 for Canada. He only coached to get us there. And then right after that, he started coaching 6, 7, 8-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And there, he noticed a lot of things, wrote a lot about it, tried to change the way the game was played here in Canada and around the world. So, he'd be excited that we've got you on here. Myself, I've written some articles on our coaches being glorified, which is based on, how coaches deal with kids. But you take the approach of, at least in the first book, that you're talking to parents. So just tell me about, one of the reasons you wrote the book and why you think, call it Changing the Game. And you call the book Parents' Guide to Raising Happy, High-Performing Athletes, Giving Youth Sports Back to Our Kids. Give us a bit of background on that.
Yeah, sure. And, I think it came out of many conversations with friends in sport. And for me, having coached many years and run organizations and things like that, that I was just like, being an executive director or technical director of a club, saying, well, I wish I could get some good information in the hands of parents, because when you don't give them good information, then they make it up on their own, or they, go down the wrong path. And then it becomes this really hard thing. And I think 99% of parents, like, they're great people. They love their kids. They just want to help. And if we're not helping them know, hey, this is helpful and this is not, then we risk them getting bad information. And so that's kind of how the idea for the book was born. But, much like a Tony Waiters, who went out there from the highest level of sport, coaching in a World Cup, to jumping in and coaching, 6-year-olds. And I guarantee you, Tony went through stuff where, the parents were like, oh, this Tony Waiters, he doesn't know what he's doing. My kid needs to be this and that. And I mean, I'll even tell you, one of the conversations that I had that prompted the book is your own MLS coach, Chris Armas, is one of my lifelong friends. We grew up playing together, same team and everything. And when Chris retired from playing with the Chicago Fire and moved back to New York, moved back to Long Island, where we're from, he was just volunteer coaching his oldest son, like 9-year-old team. and he's just teaching them how to play and everything. And he's like, I had 3 parents that basically demanded that we play a tournament every weekend, and that everything I was doing wrong, because their private trainer, Brazilian skills coach, said that what I was doing was wrong. And he's like, I just finished playing 65 times for the U.S. national team. And he's like, 3 parents left my volunteer recreation team to go play someplace else because they didn't think I was doing it right. And it's like, and it's just, so that was one of the many conversations I had of, like, if people aren't going to trust him, then, coaches need to be trusted. And if we want people to trust coaches, then people have to know what good looks like. And so that's kind of why I wrote Changing the Game. Came across all this research, and I'd, done my USSF A license and national youth license. And I'm like, why didn't anyone teach me most of this stuff when I was taking these courses? Like, this would have been super helpful to know. And so try to pull all that together in a way that could help parents and coaches, like, help their own kids, right? Understand the journey a bit more. Know that if, how to communicate a little bit better. Where does confidence come from? How to develop competence, all these different things that sometimes there's just a lot of mythology out there. And I wanted to cut through that a little bit.
Unmute myself again. Yeah, and talking about mythology, you have in the importance of youth sports, like I guess there's always questions as to whether sport is as important as they say it is, and you go into the importance of it and the benefits of youth sports, and then you talk about your 3 myths. I don't know if you even remember that, because that was your first book.
Yeah. Well,
explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the myths around, and this is a general sports book, right? And so all generalizations and at the individual level. But one of the big myths that I think really was causing a lot of the dropout in sports was, a push for, high intensity, high competitive, early specialization type of experiences with really, really young kids. And again, every sport is different. So a sport like soccer or a sport like hockey, kids need a lot of reps, and they need to see situations and make lots of decisions and all that sort of stuff. And so you have to accumulate more hours at a young age in soccer than you do in volleyball, for instance, right? Or basketball or something like that. But overall, so many kids were losing ownership, and they lose the enjoyment of the game because it gets too serious too soon. And so I was trying to debunk that myth that, at 5 years old, you have to do soccer, only soccer, and nothing but soccer. Some kids are like, yeah, this is all I want to do. And you can support that, but every human being needs like a multi-movement experience. And being multi-sport doesn't mean you have to play travel ice hockey, travel soccer, and travel baseball. Like it just means have a multi-movement experience. So ride bikes, jump on a trampoline, go do, gymnastics for non-gymnasts, just learn how to tumble and move your body, strength and conditioning in your early teenage years those are other sports. And if you do get a multi-sport experience, you're going to be a better athlete, which then allows you to stay injury-free longer and train more, which will make you a better insert sport later on. And so soccer has been especially guilty of developing soccer players without developing the athlete. And then the kids break down when they hit their growth spurt and drop out of the game, which I think is the worst thing. So that would be one myth. If you want to explore that one further, I can jump into the other ones.
Yeah, let's just mention to the audience that if you wanted to ask a question, there's a chat box. See a couple there, outstanding book from Rambo, and there's a Q&A. So either way, we can ask questions for John. But yeah, you do see a lot of, especially here in Canada, you see academies, I think, or coaches that are making, I guess, charging kids and making money that, they want them to commit to just soccer year round. Whereas, our great hockey player, great Wayne Gretzky, he always told hockey parents, go play soccer, go play baseball. You don't have to do hockey 12 months of the year. So that early specialization, I agree with you, is a big myth. And then you had your second and third myths.
Yeah. So, I mean, next one was just this, that kind of goes hand in hand with that first, is this like early focus on winning and results and tryouts and all these sort of things. And, when we select teams, the younger that we make cuts, the younger that we tier our kids, what we're really usually doing is just basically selecting the older kids, right? And they call this relative age. So whatever, the kids who are born within 3 months of whatever your arbitrary calendar cutoff date are far more likely to be selected as gifted or talented or to your A team. until about the age of 15 or 16. And so what we do is we bias a whole group of kids, and who are born at the latter part of the year. And this has been proven over and over in hockey and soccer. I mean, in my last book I wrote about, it was like the 2019 European under 17 championships, right? And so these are kids who are growing up in professional clubs, and yet like 65% of the kids were quarter-1 kids, right? So 65% of the kids in this tournament were born between January and March, right? So think about how many kids we're missing. And so one of these other things is that in our incessant push to focus and identify talent at younger and younger ages, it doesn't work, right? It just gets like you're just looking at older kids oftentimes, and you're missing out on a lot of kids. And so you're far better off to train as many kids as possible, and give them great coaching to as many kids as possible, and put them in the best environment, and just be patient and see who emerges and loves the game, rather than trying to identify because you're terrible. There's a guy from York University right by you, Joe Baker, sports scientist, and he said something to me that really stuck. He said, how differently would we treat all the kids that we coach in our club, especially on the B and C and D team, if we assumed that we got the selection wrong instead of got it right? He's like, because those coaches, we assume that we got the picks right, and these are the best 12 kids, and these are the next 12. He goes, but the evidence is overwhelming that we're wrong. The younger we go, the more wrong we are. And how would we coach differently if we just assume that, we picked these 12 on the A team, but most likely we're totally wrong in this regard. So how are we going to coach the B, C, and D team as well?
Good. Yeah, that's I haven't heard of that one before, but that's a good one from up here in Toronto area, York University, where I went.
Yeah.
And had some great years there. We won a national title. So
well, there you go.
Proud to say that.
And after your own heart.
Yeah, it took York another 31 years after to win another one, and now they're a powerhouse with Carmen Sacco running that program. And now your third myth.
I mean, I think I talked in that book about the myth of just college scholarships, and that there's these abundant opportunities at the next level if we just do enough. And certainly from an American standpoint, investing tens of thousands of dollars in sport is a terrible way to pay for your higher education. And schools have gotten more and more expensive. And yet, outside of American football and basketball, there's very few full scholarships out there. The average athletic award's a couple $1,000s a year. So it doesn't really pay for school. But when your sole focus is on getting that scholarship and getting seen and all that, and I deal with this with families all the time, because we live in kind of like an isolated part of Oregon. We have families who at 12 or 13 years old think that they need to drive 3 hours each way to play with a different team. And I'm like, when you're 13, you should be working on getting better, not getting seen, right? If all you're focused on is getting seen, and you're going to spend 16 hours a week in the car to get seen, the kids who are working on getting better are going to pass you by. And so that's another big myth that causes a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety for parents. And I mean, certainly I'll be 50 this year. And when I grew up, and, I mean, a guy like Chris went to Delphi University. He wasn't recruited by all the big colleges, and, and then, had a great career there and a great professional career, and, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, everyone's on their own journey. Everyone's on their own path. And the most important thing a parent can do and a coach can do is instill love of the game. Like, if you love it enough, then you'll go out and practice and train on your own enough to be good at it. But I see so many people just forgetting about the enjoyment and forgetting about the love, and just focusing on the hours of training and stuff like that, and the private coaches and this and that. And then you see these 13-year-old zombies walking around, and they might possess ability, but they're not going to make it because they don't love the game.
100%. I agree with you on that one. And I know I talk to parents all the time, and sometimes it seems like you're not getting through to them because they're feeling this pressure from, or wherever. I think they need to hear your voice in that. And so in your book you do have, when you're talking to parents, you talk about action steps, questions for your child, and questions changing the game for the family. So you kind of break it down so that it's simple to understand. Just explain it a little bit about
Yeah.
that before we get
Yeah,
back to that.
I wanted in the book to sort of not just have it a book that mom or dad would read and then put aside. I was like, hey, here's things to discuss as a family. Like, you should be having conversations around sports. You should be asking your children what they want out of it. You should be familiar with their goals and their dreams in sport, and not just impose yours upon them because you think that they have opportunities that you didn't. Because again, this ownership and enjoyment breed intrinsic motivation, right? And that's again, to quote Joe Baker, like, that's the fuel. That's the fuel. And if you don't have intrinsic motivation, you're not gonna make it. And so these are the areas that I really think families need to discuss and get clear on. And then also, like, you know what, John, like, even if you are incredibly successful, right? Even if you go like yourself and you win a national championship, you still end up in the bar league eventually, right? Like, that's where you're going to finish your career. And yet all the things that you learn from sport, you can either, they've been good and positive, and you take them and you apply them to the rest of your life and your career in or outside of sport. Or I took nothing from sport except the technical, tactical stuff, and I got injured and beat up and psychologically beat down, and now I can't even function as a human being. And so I think sport is this wonderful vehicle to develop character and do all these things. And as a family, you need to, like, when you're signing your kid up, you have to look at that and go, man, like, does this organization, do the things that they value, reflect what we value at home? Or are they the antithesis, right? Like, I of course would want, John DeBenedictis to teach my kids finishing because he knows something about that, right? And he's got a record of doing it, but not if John's a total a-hole who treats my kids terribly and makes them come home in tears every day. Who cares if they can finish, right? Who cares if they can score goals? And I think so many times we look at the win-loss record of a organization and not how do they treat the human beings on that team. So, or are they just like a piece of chattel to be discarded when the next shiny object comes around? And I think that's where too many parents don't have those discussions about what do we really value and what do we want to get out of sports. And when we look at the end of the sporting journey, most likely at age 18, if you're lucky at age 22, right? What's coming out of that? Hopefully it's a good human being who's like, man, sport was awesome for me, and not someone who's like, sport ruined me.
I agree 100%. Absolutely. And, I think sometimes you wonder if coaches change their behavior because, the pressure of the parents on them. Whereas I think sometimes some coaches just needs to keep doing what they've been doing. Because I've seen scenarios where, coach is such a nice guy. And sometimes in the youngest of groups, maybe they haven't got the soccer experience, and then they hear parents shouting, and then they change their behavior to please the parents. And I think that's that's a bit of a problem. But I think here in Canada, with all the different courses that they're we have to take and deal with all the different specific age groups and also the child versus youth versus senior. And you did bring up in your book I think it's the Canadian Sports for Life that we have here. The Canadian Sports for Life, the long-term athletic development. I want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so, the LTAD model in Canada, or in the US, they call it the ADM or whatever. These are models that a lot of countries have followed over the last 2 decades in terms of, in general, what's appropriate at each age and stage for kids. Some of the pushback against it is, from which I happen to agree with, and this is an area I've dove more in since I wrote that book, is the proponents of nonlinear pedagogy, right? People don't develop in a linear fashion. You don't turn 9 and then need this. You don't turn 12 and then need this, right? You've got 11-year-olds who hit puberty and 14-year-olds who still haven't hit it yet. So I think what the model tries to do is give an age range, and then I think sometimes practitioners have come in and not done a great job with it and said, well, you are now no longer in the fundamental stage, so you don't get to have fun anymore. You need to learn to train and whatever. And we try to dump all the kids into that same funnel instead of saying, well, what's the level of this team? What's the level of their commitment? And I got 3 kids who are ready to move on, and I got 9 who really should stay right here. And so I think I think anytime we try to create models, we run into, my friend Chris from Belgium says, it's great on paper and poop on the grass, right? And so, like, I'll tell like a basketball story. When my daughter was playing basketball in probably 5th grade or so, there was like 2nd grade or 3rd grade boys would come in before her group. And those boys, according to the rules, right, got to play on lower hoops. So they had these lower hoops on top of the 10-foot baskets that were only 8 feet high for the boys to play on. Well, the girls would come in and they would start shooting on these lower hoops. And they've got good technique and everything looks good. And they're making all these baskets. But then the rules of the league said, oh no, in 5th grade, you play on 10-foot hoops because that's what the pros play on, right? So we're going to make these 4-foot tall, 72-pound little girls play on the same height hoop as the 6'10", 250-pound men play on, because that's what we need to do, right? Because that's how the game is played at the highest level. And so I would watch these girls who have learned how to shoot, good technique on this, all of a sudden get to the high baskets and the two-handed heave. No one's making any shots. And I would sit there going, is anyone watching this who runs this league going, oh, look at this. This is fantastic, right? All you're doing is discouraging kids. And so that's where I think sometimes when we come up with these models, we also have to use common sense of who's in front of us and what do they need. Because, yeah, there's, some phenomenal 9-year-old soccer players out there who are ready to move on. But, certainly until a couple of years ago here in the United States, I mean, we had 9-year-olds playing 11v11 soccer. And there's still people who think they should. And there's still people in Canada who think that they should, right? And it's ridiculous. But then I've been to La Masia and I'm watching their under 14s playing 7-a-side. And the technical quality and the speed of play and the understanding of the game is so high. And yeah, the goalkeeper could punt it into the other box on one bounce, but he doesn't, because that's stupid, right? So that's why they're better than us, right? Smaller numbers, more passes, more shots, smaller space. And then sure, give them the big field later on. But when I see like people trying to put 9-year-olds on a big giant 70 by 120 field and say, but this is how the pros play, we need to get used to that. Well, that's stupid. Like, we don't, take those kids and make them learn calculus. So.
And I agree. And I think that here in Ontario anyway, I'm assuming it's going to go the rest of Canada. I think starting, so right now it's U11 and 12, it's 9v9.
Right.
U13, you're full field, full,
That's what the US is as well.
right. So I think starting next year, though, our U13s are going to still stay at 9v9.
That's great.
So I think that's a step in the right direction.
I mean, if it works for Spain and it works for Belgium, Belgium does 8v8, right? Yeah. Why do we think that it's not good for Canadian players or US players? Because it's not like we're ahead of them, So it's just, it's this crazy thing. What was really interesting is in my own club that my kids play in this fall, because of COVID, we had no league. There was no statewide leagues or whatever. And like I said, we have, 100 miles of geographic isolation around us on either side, but we've got a lot of kids playing. So we set up our own in-house 7-a-side league, right? And it was fantastic, right? And we made teams and we blended age groups. So the, 11s and 12s played together and the 13s and 14s. And then we mixed all the high school age kids. And, in the beginning, people were like, oh, this is stupid. I want to play a big game, blah, blah, blah. But by the end, like, they couldn't play 7-a-side in the beginning. Because guess what? If you don't keep the ball, it's a really tiring game, and your outside backs are going to stop running and giving you width if you don't pass them a ball, right? And so you learn to manage the pace of the game and the flow of the game. And you play soccer and you've learned to fill spaces. And our kids became far better players after 2.5 months of 7-a-side games than they would have playing 11-a-side games.
Yep, I agree, and I think just going back to the scholarship thing for a second, and that myth of losing out, being seen. I had a coach who I work with in Kansas, actually, high school, Dave Wambenga, who says, if you're good, they'll find you.
Yeah,
somehow you'll be found because someone's going to say something to somebody. And the word will get around. You don't necessarily have to go to all these showcases. I think if you're really good, you'll get found.
Yeah, I agree.
So scaling the game down and all that. Now I've got here. You mentioned in the book as well. I mean, first of all, we didn't really mention the dropout rate. I think you were saying about 70% are dropping out by 13 years of age, approximately.
Yeah, and now with the pandemic, we have no idea how that's going to affect it. But what we do know from past economic downturns is, who does that affect more? It's kids from lower socioeconomic status. So that's inner city kids and immigrant kids and things like that. Like, they have they're far less likely to come back to sports than affluent suburban kids are.
Yeah. And I mean, you might still see them playing in the playground or in the fields with their friends, but in terms of playing on a team, that might be a challenge for them. The old pay-to-play model could be a problem. But you did mention values had changed. Remember that portion of your book? But
yeah, I mean, I think most of us listening, and I have no idea what the age range here would be, but most of us have, been around the block a few times, and like, I talk about some research in the book, just in popular culture, right? What is popular culture value? And, if you grew up in the 50s, 60s, or, I grew up in the 70s, is my early years, elementary school years, and you turned on TV, you had things like family and benevolence and treating people well. Well, what do kids grow up with now? How many likes can I get on TikTok? How famous can I be, right? How do I get my money? How do I get paid? How do I show off in front of people? And I mean, I think it's a terrible thing, because people go and they're, take it back to sports, right? It's all about getting my statistics or whatever. But, soccer is a team game, right? And if you can't play for the team, then you're probably not going to make it, unless you're so extraordinarily talented that they're willing to build the team around you. But those players are so far and few in between, right? For most people, like you got to be, and especially the modern game, right? It's less about, I talked to my friend Carlo, my podcast this past week was Carlo Canocchia, and he is Claudio Ranieri's assistant, at Sampdoria this year, and they were at Roma last year. And he played in Serie A back in the day for Napoli and for Cagliari and Atalanta. And he talked about, well, how has the game changed? And he said back then he's like, as an outside back, my job was to mark a player, right? That was my job, and I was a defender, and I just had to defend, right? And he's like, that was what I was supposed to do. And then the game had these amazing stars, Roberto Baggio and Donadoni and whatever, and they would do things. And so their incredible talent would break down the other team and do something different. He's like, and so your job was just win your individual battle and then hope that you had one guy who could break down the other team. He's like, now the team is the star, right? It's pressing and counter pressing and low blocks and medium blocks and this and that. And it's tactical systems and understanding of how to work together and support together. So if we're raising kids that, can't play nice in the sandbox with others, they can't succeed at the highest levels of the game, or even I think the highest levels of the youth game anymore, because you have to understand how 11 people work and move together. And so when society is saying, look at me, get me, and sport is saying, look at us, be part of us, work for us, those things don't really play so well together.
Yeah, that's true. And like you said, it's not always just about on the field. In your everyday life, you got to, you might end up working in a business, a factory, and you have to work with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So sport does teach that. You mentioned the happy mindset
Mm-hmm.
in your book. Maybe you might want to explain that.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, this idea of mindset, most of us have probably heard of the work of Carol Dweck by now, and this idea of fixed or growth mindset individuals. And I think this was one of the things that when I was researching this book, I was like, man, this is something we should be teaching coaches, is that people have these two types of mindset, right? The fixed mindset individual, my abilities are fixed. So hard work and effort and time don't make a difference. I either got it or not. Whereas the growth mindset person says, like, if I put it, I'm not good yet, but if I practice more, if I train harder, and I do it long enough, I'll get better. And that's the high performing mindset. That's the fulfilling mindset. And so I used to call those, uncoachable versus coachable people, right? That, because the kid with the fixed mindset that you say, you know what, you need to start, working on your left foot, because, half your chances in the game are falling to your left foot, and you keep having to switch it back to your right to try to score, right? The fixed mindset kid says, oh, coach doesn't think I'm good, because if I was good, I wouldn't have to be coached. So they push back and they argue with you and they make excuses for that. While the growth mindset kid says, coach is trying to make me better. That makes sense. Let me work on that next thing. And so I think as coaches, we encounter a lot of fixed mindset kids who have been praised their whole life for being great, scoring all the goals. You're so talented. You're so smart. You're so athletic. And now, as the funnel gets smaller, and as they all of a sudden start to surround themselves with other alphas, well, it doesn't come very easily anymore, right? And if I don't have a growth mindset and say, well, I got to get to work, I'm going to be washed out pretty quickly.
I can certainly relate with that. I call it the 20-60-20 theory that I have when coaching, and 20%, doesn't matter what you say, they can't seem to get it, or don't want to listen, or they think they've got it all. Do you think, though, that you can take that athlete who's stubborn or whatever you want to call it, and we change them? Do you think
Yeah.
you can, or do you think it's like a hopeless case?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, from our own coaching, right, we have to be careful what we praise, right? And we have to praise the work. We have to praise the process. So we have to say to them, you know, you know, again, to go to your line of work of like, hey, you know what? Like for that last month, I saw those 2 goals you finished with your left foot. All those reps we're putting in practice. It's paying off. Well done. Let's keep it going. That focuses on outcome tied to work versus, hey, you scored 3 goals. You're the best. Well done. Take the next 2 weeks off. Right. And so as coaches, we can focus on that process. But then I think the second thing we have to do is teach parents about this, right? And say, are you praising the process too? Or are you just, heaping praise upon your beautiful snowflake, that everything is great and that stick figure is the most beautiful piece of art next to Van Gogh you've ever seen? Like, that's not helping the kid. You're right. Instead of saying, you know what, that looks great. You must have worked really hard on that. Now you're attaching hard work to a good outcome to praise. That's a pretty good thing to do.
Got to unmute myself again. Great advice. Now we have someone here who said the best moment is when the kids don't realize they have just trained for an hour and just want to keep playing.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I love when my kids go, wait, why are we picking up the cones? And I'm like, oh, well, we're done. Why are we ending early? No, we've been here 90 minutes. Like, what? Yeah. Like, I think that's a pretty good practice right there. When, you've got great activities and the kids are moving and they're clicking and they're enjoying themselves, but yet it's challenging and they're in that like learning zone. And then all of a sudden it's done and they got to go home, because those are the ones who are like, wait, when do we get to do this again? And that's when it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember just as a kid, never mind with practices, I'd go on a Saturday and play whatever sport, and 6 hours later, still playing, somehow. So if you enjoy it, here's another one from John Stumble. John, thanks for all your books. I read them all and info on your website. Your Chris Armas story is so sad, but it's probably more relevant today. How would you attempt to show these players of parents the right path today? And do you have some examples of being successful, changing someone's perceptions of understanding what is good with regard to soccer development?
Yeah, and thank you, John, for the kind words and everything. I mean, I think what I've tried to do with Changing the Game project is just put as many examples of that out there, and just say, look, this is the path. This is the reasonable path. I mean, I think number one, I always say to parents, look, especially those who have more than one kid, are like, are your kids exactly the same? And of course, parents are like, no, they couldn't be more different. It's like, so you raised 2 kids or 3 kids or 4 kids in the same house with the same parents that ate the same food and the same things together, and yet they're totally different. So why would you think your son's path is the same path as this person? It's not. So understand that everyone has their own path. Number 2, to steal a phrase from David Epstein, he's like, overcome the cult of the head start, right? Like this idea, and the example he uses, which is great. He's like, sure, you can teach your kid to walk by 5 months old, but eventually everyone walks. So you get this head start, but it's not a long-term advantage. And so I think a lot of parents in youth soccer are trying to get that head start, but if they lose motivation, if they lose love of the game, if they get injured and they don't develop athletically, then the head start isn't going to matter later on, as long as kids have access to the system. So I just try to share those stories with people. I mean, another podcast that I did a year and a half ago that I'm actually going to republish here next week was with Mark Pulisic, and obviously Christian just won the Champions League with Chelsea, right? So 1 year behind Canada winning a Champions League with Alphonso Davies, but like, here's the first American to win the Champions League, and it's like, what is what Mark talked about was one of the biggest things that him and his wife Kelly did when Christian was growing up is say no. Like, no, like, thank you. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, but he needs the weekend off, or he needs to stay here and hang out with his friends this weekend or whatever. And no, he's not going to come to practice 6 days a week. He's going to do 2 days a week of training. And then 3 days a week, he's going to train with me, or he's going to train on his own, and he's going to work. So Christian was very, very good at a young age. And then what his mom and dad was, they pumped the brakes all the time. Right. Oh, sorry, Owen Hargraves. Sorry about that. Missed that one. Sorry, Rambo. Never messed with a guy named Rambo. Yeah, so that's the thing I think is like really important. Just like your job as a parent is to be the general contractor for your kid, to understand all the moving parts in their life and find the right balance for him or her. Recognize that it's going to be different for different kids in your family. Because like sometimes one of the things that people, like I'll have kids middle school, right? That, I'll see them with the sore ankles and the sore knees. And I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, you need the day off here. You shouldn't be like that. This is overuse. And then I give them a week off, and then I find out that they, ran cross country 6 days on their week off. And I grab the parent. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what's the point of me giving them a week off if you're just going to go do that? Like, their body needs to heal. Their body needs to rest. And so I try to get parents to be that general contractor, right? That person who sits there and, like, you have to manage your child's workload. You have to manage their motivation and inspiration. And sometimes the best way to do that is say no to things that are very good opportunities, but they just need a break.
Very good. And also in your book, you talk about the 7 C's of the high performance mindset. Maybe you want to quickly run through those.
Yeah, and I touched on a couple of them before, but basically, like, these are the things that, like, work in tandem to help your kids do their best. And so, it's common sense and perspective as the adult in the room for the right environment. It's I mentioned before, good communication. It's connection, caring and unconditional love, confidence, control, that's ownership, the right conditions. So those are the sort of things. And so if something's not going right, well, you need to understand, well, what's causing that, right? If the communication's bad, that's going to lessen performance and interfere with potential. If they don't own the experience, or if it, or like, people think that you can give your kids confidence by telling them they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's like, no, you can't give someone, confidence comes from competence. Confidence comes from preparation and putting in the work, not words. And so, like, help them develop the skill so they'll feel confident stepping on the field. So that's what it is. And then I kind of do like a little chapter on each one of those, and little exercises and questions to ask your kids or yourselves on each of those areas that help you, just get a better understanding of it all.
Great. And then you end up talking about patience. Which, I think I've run into parents who, their kids are still way too young. They don't realize the adolescent growth spurt can change everything. And it does take patience. Maybe you want to just.
Yeah. And again, this goes into the journey not being a linear one. And my own kids are late bloomers in terms of hitting their growth spurt and things like that. And I was as well. And I remember being a freshman in high school, looking at players on my team, and they were men and I was still a boy. And it's like, my son's just like me. He's in 8th grade right now and he weighs 105 pounds like I did, and when I graduated high school I was 170. So it's like, you just got to be patient and recognize that you can't force that to happen. So just be patient and sit back and take a deep breath and all those sort of things, which I think are really, really critical. And again, see the whole journey and don't panic about the slice in front of me. A lot of people panic during COVID because my kid fell behind, but like the journey is a 10, 12, 14-year journey. Don't worry that this was a bad week on the journey. I did a presentation for my own club the other night, the one here. When my daughter was a U12, her team, the coach walked away in September and they asked me to coach the team, and I'd been out of it for a while. So I took her U12 team, and then the next year I said, you got to give me the whole age group. I need to develop the age group, not just 12 kids. And my daughter was on the B team, and because she was a December birthday, and as she's fond of saying, for up until she was 15, there was 34 kids in the age group and she was the 33rd tallest, and now she's finally grown. And but these two teams lost every game the year before. Kids wanted to quit, and we said, no, we're going to develop you, we're going to teach you to play. And just a couple weeks ago, this team made it to the state finals here in Oregon and earned a bid to Far West Regional Championship, right? As the Oregon State Cup representative. And it's like, for me, that was just this amazing 5-year journey of, yes, there's a lot of people better than you, but if you do the right things and you do them enough, players will improve. And number two, the thing I'm most proud of is that of those 16 kids going to regionals, 7 of them spent a minimum of 1 year on the B team, right? So 7 of the 16, some of them for 4 years, 5, my daughter just this year finally moved up. And it's like, so to me, that's the thing, is like, if we give the kids the right experience, they will develop on their journey, on their timeline. But if we are in this mad rush to say, who are the 12 at 11 years old and everyone else go away, we're going to have our special group. Well, good. There's going to be 4 of you left statistically when you're 16, and you don't even have a futsal team anymore.
Absolutely right. I experienced that with our own club, where they have higher levels of play, and parents are so crazy to try and get in there, and yet the teams who have hovered in a lower league, those players are the ones who are getting scholarships sometimes.
Oh yeah.
You always get the exception where there's the kid who's good right from 8 and 18, but usually there's a huge change in turnover, and those kids who are maybe just trying to make the team at 14 and 13, 14, 15, they're working so hard to get better that in many cases they'll surpass some of the better players.
Because they appreciate it and they know what it takes, and they have that grit and resilience to work hard. And I have so many stories of that, right? That the 10-year-old who shined bright, and you're like, yeah, that kid's great. And I went on and was a first round MLS draft pick, and another kid who couldn't make the club A team until he was 15, and as a freshman he was starting at Duke, right? And so it's like, I've done this long enough now that I've seen all the different pathways. And I think the most important thing that we can get across to parents is, when your kid's young, you want a great coach who treats them well, teaches them well, and then they get playing time. Like, they need to play in an environment that's right for them. And so one of the things that I advocated for my local club, which we've done this year, is sort of U11 is where competitive soccer would start. All of our U11 through 14 for boys and girls, the A and the B team are coached by the same coach. So it doesn't matter if you make the B team. You get the same coach, you get the same experience. And now that A team coach, he's also or she's also looking at the B team players. The B team players have access to the A team practice. We do mixed stuff, and we develop an age group and not just a small group of kids. Or because if you don't do it that way where I live, again, there's no one to replace them with. We're not like in a big city where I can go steal them from your club, John. Like I'm stuck. So that's one of, I think, the most important things. And now what's been amazing is the parent response to that when their kid makes the B team is disappointment, but not panic. Because in too many clubs, when you make the B team, you're out of the pipeline, right? And you train less and you have a lesser coach and you go to a different facility and there's no way to make that jump back up. And that's just not right.
I agree. Now, you also mentioned, because I know we're running a little bit out of time. I hope you can hang in there a little longer.
Yeah, I got about probably 5 more minutes.
So you talk about the giant ride to nowhere, giant race to nowhere. Sorry. Maybe you want to explain that one a little bit.
It's funny, I that was the most popular blog still to date I ever wrote, which was just called The Race to Nowhere in Youth Sports, and it's kind of sums up what we talked about, John. Like, this massive rush to do too much too soon, to just this panic, this fear of missing out, and all these things that we never stop to say, like, wait a second, like, A, is this what my kid wants? And B, is this right? Is this even backed by like, science or anything like that? And sadly, usually it's not, right? And so it was just this call to like, take a pause, take a deep breath, and recognize, what you want out of sport, and recognize what the people in, when they come up with a long-term athlete development plan, or they come up with a curriculum, it's not just like, people didn't just wake up in the morning and make that up. Like this is something that there's science and research, and to the best of our knowledge at this moment, this is how players develop. And yet, if we look at places like England or something like that have a far longer track record than we do, you know what? They still miss Jamie Vardy. How'd you miss Jamie Vardy, right? Like, you didn't miss a reserve player. You missed the guy who's the top scorer in the league and a full international until he's 26 years old or whatever. How'd you miss him? And so, how did American football miss Tom Brady? Right? We're terrible at talent identification. So the best way to do it is wait as long as possible. And oftentimes we do the opposite. And the opposite is what I would call the race to nowhere.
Great. And just before we let you go, I'm going to ask you in a minute about where they can get your book and that. But any final advice for coaches and parents?
Yeah, if you listen to the podcast, I sign off every week with the same thing, which is your influence is never neutral, right? It's either positive or negative, but you never walk into a room of kids and leave no impact. And the more aware you are of your influence, the stronger it is. So be a force for good. Be really intentional about everything that you say and everything that you do, because it might stick with that kid for the rest of his or her life, and you don't get to pick what they remember and what they forget. And when you screw up, as we all do, especially me, probably more than others, just do what you ask your players to do, right? Mess up, tidy up, right? If you make a mistake, fix it, right? Apologize, pull the kid aside, send them a note after practice. Whatever it is, it makes you a human being. It makes you vulnerable, but it makes you a much greater leader and mentor and coach as well.
That's fantastic, John. Great advice. So you've got, as I said, your first book, I believe it's your first Changing the Game. You got a whole bunch of other books. Where can people find you, find your books and podcasts that you talk about, all the different things that you offer?
Sure. I mean, the books are just at bookstores, right? So, local bookstores, I don't know how often they carry them anymore because they're, but certainly, Amazon.ca or, Amazon is where most of my books get sold these days still. Um, and then, yeah, and international, if there's anyone international here, bookdepository.com. They ship free internationally. I just learned about them. So that's kind of a great way to not pay more for shipping than you do for the book. And then, yeah, Changing the Game Project is the website, and that's kind of the mothership for the blog and the Way of Champions podcast. And you can find that on Spotify or Apple or all those places. And then, John, I wanted to offer, Jerry and I do this conference every year called the Way of Champions Conference, which is a 3-day event. It's been a 3-day in-person event on leadership and culture and the inner game. And this year we decided to reimagine it rather than hoping that we could get together. And so that's August 21, 22, and it's virtual this year. But because we got to reimagine it, we also got to invite some pretty cool people to present. So we have Steve Kerr from Golden State Warriors, Quinn Snyder from the Utah Jazz. We have Tara Vanderveer, who just won the NCAA title at Stanford women's basketball. Anson Dorrance, who, won the 91 World Cup and 21 NCAA championships with UNC women's soccer. Cindy Timchel, Hall of Fame lacrosse coach. Jenny Levy, national team lacrosse coach. George Mumford, he was Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan's mindfulness coach. So we brought all them in to teach instead of Jerry and I this year. And it's pretty cool. We got a lot of people signed up from all over. And so what I'm going to do, John, is send you a discount code that saves anyone who listens here $100, US dollars, $100 off the registration fee for that as well.
That's fantastic. Really appreciate that. So for those who are members, you'll be able to take advantage of that discount. We'll send it to all our members, as well as whoever's listening here on podcast live. And just remember to go to nscac.ca to become a member, find out what we've had. We all our behind the bench sections are partly on there or will be on there shortly as we edit them. And John, again, thank you very much for being our special guest today, and all the best, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, and thank you, John. Thanks for all the work that you guys are doing with NSCAC and everything, because it's great. The more us coaches can get together and share ideas, the better.
Great. And hopefully we'll see you in Kansas.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Take care, man.
Bye, everybody.